Dragon Island, a story about making, not breaking. This was illustrated by my daughter, Terry Bainton. Beautiful illustrator. Dragon Island was covered in dragons. There were red dragons and blue dragons, old dragons and new dragons. There were rock dragons, tree dragons, sand dragons, and sea dragons. There were tall dragons, small dragons, long dragons, lean dragons, muddy dragons, and clean dragons. Look at them all. Dragons everywhere. There's even one hanging upside down from the tree. Yet no matter their shape or their color, all the dragons were much the same. They were all fierce, fiery, and ferocious, all except for Norman. Norman didn't break boulders, stomp stones, or flatten flowers like the other dragons did. He didn't tear trees, burn branches, or frighten fish. No, Norman liked making things. Is Norman busy making something while all around everyone else is breaking and burning and fighting? Making, not breaking, that's for me, he said. He made hats and mats from woven flax, a rocking chair from dragon hair. He made pottery jugs, wickerwork rugs, bamboo stilts, and colourful kilts. But there was one thing he could not make. He could not make the dragons stop their fighting. He would call for calm and plead for peace. He would mend and tear their battle scars. He patched their wings. He rubbed their paws. He filed their teeth. He clipped their claws. He plastered over scratches on their scuffed and scabby knees. He hugged the battered trunk of every shattered tree. But none of them changed their ways. Not one. One morning, Norman was stitching a patchwork bag when Geraldine Green came breaking by. "Claws are not for stitching," growled Geraldine. "Claws are for ripping and raking." "Not my claws," said Norman. "Muddlehead," bellowed Geraldine Green, and away she flew, strong as a storm. That afternoon, Norman was weaving a wicker basket when red-hot Robert came roasting by. "Wings are not for weaving," roared Robert. "Wings are for snapping and flapping." "Not my wings," said Norman. "Muddlehead," snorted red-hot Robert, and away he flew, fast as a flame. It was race day, a big day on Dragon Island. Once every year, when albatross passed overhead and barnacled whales drifted by with ancient songs, the dragons stopped their fighting and gathered on the beach for a race. They would race to Coconut Island, then race back with all the coconuts they could carry. The winning dragon was granted 3 wishes. Every year, only the toughest took part. But this year, Norman lined up with them. Geraldine Green stamped and snarled as she waited for the start. Red-hot Robert punched and stomped with impatient paws. Norman opened his wicker basket and pulled out his patchwork bag. Down went the starting flag, and up went the dragons. Up and away went red-hot Robert, flying high over turtles and tails, his wings whipping like a windstorm. Up and away went Geraldine Green, swooping through whip-top waves, her wings snapping like wet towels. Norman whispered warm wind into his patchwork bag. "Breath is not for whispering," scoffed a cliff dragon. "Breath is for boiling and burning." "Not this breath," said Norman. And stitch by stitch and patch by patch, His bag began to bulge and billow. Up at last went Norman, up in his big wicker basket. Over the waves he wafted, pulled along by a woven sail, and kept on course by a windmill tail. Norman came to Coconut Island and pulled out his scooping net. He caught more coconuts than he could count. Then he caught sight of Geraldine Green. She was crouching and ouching beneath umbrella wings as coconuts came cracking down. "Help me home," she hollered. There's poor Geraldine, look, all the coconuts landing on her head. So Norman did. He lowered a ladder and lifted her aloft. Halfway home, they found Red Hot Robert. He was busy shooing sharks. "All adrift! Need a lift!" he roared. Norman lowered his ladder. "Raise your rump, Robert. Hold tight, think light." "Bottoms up," said Geraldine Green. Home they came, over the surf and onto the sand, with a crunching of coconuts and a dragging of dragons. Norman had won the big race. The dragons of Dragon Island gathered round with pats and claps and rides on backs. "3 cheers for Norman," the dragons cried, "and 3 wishes." Norman announced his 3 wishes. "No fighting, no breaking, no burning," he said. "Impossible," growled Geraldine Green. "Ridiculous," roared Red Hot Robert. "You could think about it," said Norman. So they did. They thought about it and fought about it. They thumped and bumped and bit and burnt about it. "Breaking," they bellowed as they biffed and bashed. "Not making," they roared as they rumbled and raked. Norman sighed at the sight of them. Nobody listens. Nobody learns. He clambered back into his basket and blew warm breath into his balloon. "Goodbye, Dragon Island," he said. The dragons were too busy fighting to see him go, all except one. A small freckled dragon came racing and chasing along the sand. Me too," he said, "making, not breaking." And onto the ladder he scrambled. Up they flew, higher and higher, up where no dragon had ever flown before. "Will I be good at making?" asked the speckled dragon. "Well, you just made a friend," laughed Norman. And away they went, making jokes and making plans, with the waiting world stretched out on every side. Dragon Island.